Let's move on to the next one, Ryan. Your next 10K. This is what you say in general. This is the overarching principle. Once you got your first 10K, find what works and repeat it.
That's it. This is now, how do we go from a few sales that we cobbled together from a personal network to a predictable system, right? What did we learn in selling that first 10K? And presumably we learned a lot. It isn't about more ideas. It's about doubling down on what's working. We should have been able to, at this point, identify some patterns. Who's buying? What messaging works? What people are more likely to say yes? Why do they say yes? Why do they say no? All of these things add up to helping us to build a track to that next 10K. Some of this we did cover a bit in the founder-led sales piece, which is like, we got to be documenting, right? We got to document what's already working. We don't want to leave this up to chance, so we do need to be fairly diligent. But this is why, like, founder-led sales and just directly picking up the phone and talking to people, it's a lot easier to document what's working when we see all of it. Right? Sure. The minute this goes off to an automated funnel and we're looking at predictive analytics and behavioral stuff and conversion rates, we're missing a lot of the story. Like, we get the chapter headings, but we have no idea what the hero did throughout. We need all of it. Review those first 10 sales. Where did they come from? What problem did those people care about most? Out of all the things that we were pitching and talking about, what did they care about most? What objections did they have before they bought? And then we turn that stuff into assets that we use to keep selling, but we keep selling more efficiently now. Right now, we start to be able to duplicate some efforts. Okay, yeah, those first 10. So it turns out they were all from these two industry verticals. Nobody in medical cared. Nobody in fintech cared. It was all like biomed and research people. Cool. Well, now we know for now we can shunt aside those other, and we're gonna stick right here in biomed and research. And then we get into the specifics about what problem they cared, right? And now we can start to make sure that moves to the front of our pitch, right? It's like, okay, we were talking about these three problems. Turns out they really only care about this one. Or maybe they care about these two in conjunction, right? We got to learn this stuff. And the only way we learn this is by being out there and selling it, right?
And let's jump into the good stuff. And let me incentivize all you founders out there. If you can predictably make your next 10K and tell the investors how you did it, that's what they want to invest in. Yep. Not you spending your time figuring out how to just figure it out in the first place. They just want to pour gasoline on the fire. So figure this out. And these are the points that Ryan was talking to. Let's break it down. You gave a great preview. So document what's already working. How does that look?
So like I said, we're going to review those sales. We got to go back through and do postmortems on each of those. Hopefully you were taking notes through those sales calls. Hopefully if you were on Zoom, you were recording these things and have transcripts and maybe some AI insight around this stuff. If you just have the recordings, you can solve for both of those things. If you're not recording, if you're doing face-to-face sales, something like that, make sure you're taking really diligent notes during, and make sure you review those notes and augment them immediately after. And then once you've got to 10 sales, let's just say you're really good. Let's just say you're closing 1 out of 3 of these early folks. You've had 30 conversations at this point, right? So now we've got some contrast there. Now we can say, how do I thumbprint the folks that were like the 10 that we sold, and how do we avoid more of the 20 who didn't? Or what can we do to change the cadence, change the pitch, change the problem that we're pitching so that more of those 20 would be like, right? Because we can create efficiency either way. Right, we can either go find more of the people that look a lot like the people that already bought, or we can find ways to sell into the population.
I think it's a combination of doing both. You double down on what's worked, and then you try to optimize. One of the techniques in another conversation I literally had this morning, I asked the founder, what is your best sales? Like, how does that work? Let's make common sense come practice. Let's double down, because I know you're making money, and I know you've achieved a certain level of momentum in your business. And he looked at me and he said, okay, gee, that's really interesting. I think it's word of mouth. And I go, okay, let's just explore that just for a moment. How did they give that word of mouth? What did they say? What situation were they in? And he was like, gee, I don't really know. And I said, you know what? First thing you need to do, and this is okay. If you're in this spot, it's all right. Yeah. Sometimes you just stumble into sales, which is great. Like, the fish just jump into the boat because you're just in that type of fishing, environment. It's okay to go back and ask them. And that's what I told this founder to do, right? I said, go back and ask and repeat the story and document it.
Yeah, we want to know these things. Like, what was happening right before this person decided that we were necessary in their lives? And then how can we go find more people who are in that similar circumstance? So this is where the documentation is super important. To your point, it isn't just about cataloging the high level. Like, we got to understand the why. The nuance here matters so much, because then we either have to go look for situations where that nuance is likely to occur, or we can create the nuance, right? We can be the one asking the question. We can be the one showing the thing. Something sparked interest from that one person to the other. Either something in me said, I see something in you that says you need to go use Ed's HR solution, or someone came to me and said, we're struggling with this, what should we use? And I went, Ed's HR solution. Either way, word of mouth got you there, whether it was me realizing and seeing a problem in somebody else, and wanting to help them with that, or them seeing me not suffering from the problem they had and asking me about it. What can we do to create more of those conditions? So again, it's just about double clicking and doubling down on what works and then trying to make that repeatable. Some things aren't repeatable, right?
Sure.
So you may also find it's like, look, the word of mouth is actually totally random at this point, all right? There's nothing I'm doing. On rare occasions, someone asks me this and you are always the answer. Okay, cool. We may not be able to duplicate that, but we can at least find out what that conversation looks like. What's that question they're coming? What's the precipitating factor that leads the person to seek them out in the first place?
Let me give a real example. One startup that I know, and I really appreciate this startup because they would win all these awards for having the most psychological safety as far as their culture is concerned. Kind of a little off the beaten path, but gives you an idea of the quality of type of founder. And I was sitting with him. He told me, Ed, we have completely cut out all paid advertising and salespeople. And they were in the Inc. 500 top fastest growing, companies for several years in a row. And I said, so what did you end up doing? He said, Ed, I realized that all my best customers that I wanted were coming from word of mouth referrals, but it was a particular type of referral. It was a type of person who had a business suited and wanted to refer to me because it made them look good. And so here's what I did. I formalized the program and I have beers with them. Like I have a beer with them every week to talk about how we can optimize it. And then they get to request me what collateral, what do they need, and how do they deal with that? And that's all I do. And our entire business is built on that. And they grew so fast, they had all their HR problems. And so that was one thing of they not only took, a page out of your book when you explained, Ryan, before, sometimes you're getting the wrong yeses, like the wrong customers. They optimized, doubled down on what worked, continued to squeeze it, and it just kept going and going and going. And that's what you're talking about, Ryan. You're illustrating, go find out, document the process, and then continue doing it. We have a little bit more time. Let's add to this. Turn early wins into a flywheel. What does that look like?
Ask every single paying customer for referrals. Right.
Beautiful.
But use the tactic I said before around be specific about the number that you're asking for and be specific about the criteria to make it easier for them to know who in their network, right? Short circuit that mental math that they have to do and make it easy. All right. Who else do you know that needs this? All right. You've benefited in all these ways and we've solved this problem for you. Who else do you know that has this particular problem? All right. Capture testimonials. Use them everywhere, right? So make all of this early momentum into more momentum. So very frequently, once we get a sale, we only worry about like servicing that customer's needs. And we assume that the only value that customer has to us is the money that they pay us for continuing to service those needs. Absolutely untrue. At the early stage, the value each new client represents might be far greater than the cash they ever pay you in terms of their ability to help you achieve escape velocity and get into that next 10K and beyond.
We have a system for that, Ryan, right here in Startups.com, where as soon as we have a magic moment, something good, we automatically ask for a testimonial, and it's baked into our system. So that's what you're talking about. Like, start turning that into a flywheel. Systems create flywheels, everyone. That's so important. Next, now we're going to expand. You're saying test one new acquisition channel.
One. Okay. Now we know who our buyers are. Now let's go find more of them. All right. Once we've got 10, we should be able to draw some lines in the sand around kind of what defines who they are and who they aren't. We can contrast that against the 10 that bought, and in my example, I think the 20 who didn't, right? We said we talked to 30 people, we sold to 10. So you now have some ability to fingerprint these folks and then to try to duplicate that, right? So now we sort of know who they are. We want to go find more of them. So we pick one new channel, right? What channel do we pick? The one where we're most likely to find these folks, not the one that we're comfortable with, not the one that we've used in the past, not the one that our competitors are using. All right, the one that is where these people are hanging out. How could we possibly know where they're hanging out? We ask them, right? We got 10 of them. We just ask them, like, where are you going for your information? Where are you going? And then think about things. Like we've talked about this before, but like the channel we pick, they can't just be there. They have to be there and they have to be in the right frame of mind to do whatever it is that we need to do in that channel, right? So if we want them to book a call with us, it probably, late night Facebook ads are not the thing, right? If we want them to join a community, LinkedIn might be a great place for that. We just build a group there and we have them opt in, right? So we got to think about what that next action is and where we want to find them, but make sure that we're not picking a platform where they're emotionally, psychologically, or somehow otherwise less likely to do what we need.
Looking for those underestimated or underrepresented gaps. Here's a pro tip that I do. Once I have my best customers, I put them all together and then I just creep their social media. I literally spy on them and I find out their behaviors. And if I find out they all like a particular movie, or they happen to all go to a conference, or they all follow or quote the same person, because you can get all that these days, right? Like,
Yep.
it's amazing the intelligence that you can source. And I look for these really kind of blue ocean or things that my competitors are not looking at, some commonality. And if I can find that, man, that's gold. I can mine that all day long.
Yeah. If you are super differentiated and one of your differentiation points like is your competitor and being able to say we are different than so and so in a way that like most of your customer base has told you they want them to be different, goes back to, the mom test, doing that customer interview research and understanding why the incumbent solutions don't solve the problem completely. Then positioning yourself on the same channel as your competition might make a lot of sense. If you're not fully differentiated, if it sort of like comes down to preference, or maybe you're not well enough known, you probably don't want to be hanging out next to your biggest competitors, right? You got to find other ways to reach them. Now, you may not be able to. You may say, like, look, there's fairly narrow channels. Our competitors are across all of them. I do want you to remember something. I tell founders this a lot. At the early stages, we generally are not competing with another company or another product or another service. We're competing with our own ability to execute and provide value and to describe that value to people. So take a little bit of solace in that. And again, this is why we started with that internal network of people who know us. Immediate additional credibility boost, unless you've eroded your credibility in your network, in which case, like, let's talk separately. That's a huge issue. But yeah, we just want to pick one little channel, start small, validate that channel before scaling, because that's the other thing that I'll see people do. Is they're like, okay, now we got to jump. Now we got a channel. Now let's pour a ton of cash into this. The reality is these things are typically not fully sequential. Like, you've sold 10 people using your personal network. Now we are going to flywheel using the paying customers you already had. We're going to be looking for referrals. We're going to be capturing testimonials. We're going to be building on that. We're still going to be selling within our own network, right? So this isn't a okay, now stop doing that and start doing this, because the likelihood that one new acquisition channel takes off right from the get-go is relatively low. So we want to make sure that these things are running in parallel to some degree, overlapping for at least a while, not running in sequence. Because I think when you start to run in sequence, you set yourself up for this very herky-jerky start-stop where growth all of a sudden stalls out, revenue goes to zero, and then we figure out the channel. Like, keep it flowing, keep it going.
The last point, refine your offer and pricing.
Yep.
So you got a channel. Now we continue to refine. That's the name of the game.
Yeah, this is part of a more macro theme around just making it easier for your customers to say yes. All right. So part of that is just being able to find you, right? That's why we go with the additional channel. Part of that is getting those referrals, because it's easier to say yes if somebody I know that I trust has already done this. Capturing those testimonials. If I don't know the person, but I can see lots of people saying, hey, this works, I want to do that too. All right, going back to what's already worked so that we know what those objections are, so that we can handle them before they ask them, so that we can reframe the problem contextually so that it's very specific to them. All of what we're doing at this stage is trying to make it easier for people to say yes. All right, so by refining the offer and the pricing based on that feedback, all right, is our pricing clear? Do people understand it? Do they like it? All right. Do they push back against parts of it? Like me and HubSpot literally every month, where I'm like beating them up because, why are you charging me this way for this when how I consume it is actually that, right? Go talk to people about this stuff because this can not only impact your ability to sell, it can impact your ability to drive LTV, all right? If somebody's like, well, we'll try it. I don't like that they're charging me on a per contact basis, but let's see if there's ROI. If I get 3 or 4 months in and I'm like, but the number of contacts we have doesn't line up with the amount of activity that we've got, I'm going to have to make a switch. So we want to make sure that's there. Think about things like money back guarantees. Now that we understand what our cost inputs for servicing these clients are and the amount of time and money it takes us to get them, we can do some things like money back guarantees or tying that to milestones, something else that makes it easier for them to say yes, lowers that emotional, analytical, financial barrier to saying yes. Maybe you find that payment plans work, but at this stage, we want to get to the understand, we now know the pattern of communication that gets people to yes. So now we're looking at how do we optimize that last mile? What are all those little things that happen as they go from that conversation with us to needing to plunk down the Amex, write the check, wire the money, whatever it is? How can we optimize that piece of it?
All good stuff.